Actually, yes, if you can mute yourselves, otherwise I will end up muting Emma as well. Okay, so I know most of you already know Emma, but also a few of you don't. So I'm going to introduce the two of us, but I mean, welcome everybody. Welcome Emma and welcome everyone who's come today.
Glad to be here.
It's great to have you here, it really is. So for those of you who don't already know me, I'm a relationship coach and I've got a special interest in people who experienced abandonment or separation trauma as children, and that comes out of my own experience of going to boarding school. But before that, I worked for 20 years as an osteopath. And before that, I worked for a London council doing crime prevention and civil liberties work. So I've had a bit of a varied career, really. But when I was an osteopath, I spent about 15 years working with patients who had chronic fatigue syndrome. And that led me to a recognition of the role of childhood trauma in a lot of chronic illness. And then I started my coach training with Jamie Smart in 2017 and did some training as well with One of Many, which is a women's coaching outfit. And I was going to say my own dysfunctional relationship history, which I'm not particularly proud of, but I might as well own it, kind of reflected the trauma of being sent to boarding school at 11, which is kind of what led me to do what I do now. And I'm happy to say that the current relationship is very successful, so I'm pleased with that. And so I now work with clients who either have mental health issues and or want to make a better fist of their relationships. So Emma McDevitt, I met Emma at the beginning of this year. Actually, it was probably the year before because I think there were some preceding workshops and things. But I was on a program with Emma and Jamie Smart called the Clarity Professionals Program, which is kind of about each of us finding our own unique expression and the unique gifts that we bring to things. So Emma works with coaches, therapists, and heart-centered human beings of all kinds, any kind of human, to uncover their unique gifts, qualities, and purpose. And she works as a coach with young people, both individually and in schools, to help them uncover their innate resilience and well-being, and that innate wisdom that we all have as well. And she supports people in wanting to realise their purposeful contribution in the light of ecological breakdown, climate change, and the other challenges that we face. So Emma, I'm huge welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I was going to start. Can we just start by talking about what your understanding is of innate resilience?
Sure. Okay, so I guess the way I've come to see things and what I experience in my clients and my children and the young people I work with and all that kind of thing is that we have an innate tendency towards well-being, towards getting over things, towards recovering from our experience, from all manner of experiences, given the right conditions. And that to me is both incredibly hopeful and I think a missing piece in both a lot of therapeutic work and a lot of people's own experience. I mean, I can say more about it if you like, but that's what comes to mind immediately.
Well, I like that last piece about the missing piece, because what happens when it's missing?
Yeah.
So when you talk about the missing piece in a lot of therapeutic work, so it's obviously an important piece, isn't it? It's essential to recovery.
I guess actually this is probably worth kind of talking about early on. So one of the things I was going to bring up in this is when you first asked me if I would have a conversation, around this topic of healing in relationships, I thought, yes, definitely, I'd love to. And it seemed to me that that it's very true that yes, healing often does happen in the context of relationships, and ultimately there's a paradox there, because it seems to me that the relationship that ultimately determines all others in our lives is our relationship to ourselves. And to me, that immediately raises the question of kind of which self are we talking about? So when we talk about the missing piece, I think it's important in this context to look at um, uh, almost like, what are those pieces? So in terms of that, when we're talking about innate resilience or those intrinsic qualities of being, it looks to me like we're born into this world, and when we're born into this world, we're kind of a blank slate or a sponge. What we are is this kind of source of creative capacity, and as we kind of spend time in the world, we use this creative capacity to start to make sense of the lights and noises and sights and sounds around us, and moment to moment, this this creative capacity that's the heart of us starts to almost like stitch together a reality for us, like it starts to name things, it starts to put things together and create cause and effect, and it starts to tell a narrative about who we are, what's in the world around us, what the rules of the world are. And ultimately, as we go through that developmental process, we use that kind of infinite creative ability, which is at the heart of us, to create a sense of identity, a story about who we are, what we're capable of, what we're like as a person, what we need to do or not do in order to be accepted or be okay or be successful, what aspects of ourselves are welcome in the world, what aspects of ourselves are not welcome. And so this kind of pure creative potential, which is the source of all of our experience and of our ideas about ourselves, that's the missing piece I'm talking about. And that looks like it looks like the foundational element when it comes to understanding and accessing our innate resilience, our innate potential for healing, all that sort of thing. But it's kind of it's one piece of when I talk about who we really are in our relationship to ourselves. That's one aspect of it.
Okay. So the other thing we were going to talk about is the kind of the innate capacity for loving connection, and how that fits together with that innate well-being and innate resilience, and how that, I guess, how that plays out in our relationships. Yeah.
Sorry, did you have another question?
No, that's fine. That's enough.
Okay. Let me think about where to go there. Okay. So it also seems to me that if we go back to, for example, the baby born into the world, as a baby, we have no sense of ourselves as a distinct entity, of ourselves as separate uh, from what's around us. So, as I said, we're that pure creative capacity, and we're also pure awareness. We have the capacity to experience that creation. And again, as we go through life, we learn to identify ourselves as distinct and different and separate uh, from the rest of the world. And which is a good thing. Otherwise, how would we know, whose shoes to put on and whose teeth to brush and all that sort of thing. But the thing that looks important to me is that intrinsically, I'll go even further. To me, intrinsically, it's not just that we have the capacity for love and connection. It's that prior to the creative act of understanding ourselves as separate, we are that love and connection at core.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it looks to me.
So it's like it's the first thing. It's the first principle or something.
Yeah.
It comes before
Yeah,
all.
you go far enough upstream, and I'm not saying that's where we should spend all our time or anything like that, but we go far enough upstream, and that's almost like the raw material of which we and our experience is made of.
Yeah, and then there's the way it seems to me is that we then enter into relationships of all sorts, initially with our parents, maybe siblings if we have any, and then gradually that world expands out away. And at any point, we're going to encounter dysfunction, disrepair, disharmony. And it's that thing of learning how to respond in that situation so that we can come back into that loving connection. And as children, we're really dependent upon our parents to help us with that.
Yeah.
In terms of the kind of cognitive, cognitive is the wrong word, but that's the learning side of it. And then, so then we were going to talk about abusive relationships and I can't remember the language anymore that you put it beautifully, but whether it's
I don't remember
relationship, I know it's shocking, isn't it? So whether it's a lovely relationship, a lovely, connected, loving, healthy relationship, or whether it's an abusive relationship, and how that innate capacity for both of the connection and for healing, how they play out in those two different settings.
Yeah. Well, I guess the way it makes sense to me to talk about it is to go back to, so we all come into the world like almost like made of the same raw stuff, like that creative capacity, that pure awareness, and so on. And that is one aspect of our beingness, and to me it's so important to know that that's available, because that is the source of new experience. For example, no matter what the experiences you've had in the past, no matter what the patterns of previous relationships, no matter what the difficulties or patterns you've been running or experiencing until now, the fact that we have this creative capacity that's creating our experience moment to moment means it's always possible to have a new experience regardless of what's gone before. And that looks really essential to me. Otherwise, what are you playing for? Like if that capacity we have means that healing or an increasing return to wholeness or knowing ourselves as whole is always possible, then that's the place to put our attention. Whereas I think if we think the best that we've got available is trying to unpick patterns that were deeply entrenched, and in order to cope better with life, then that's a different prospect altogether. But to come back to what you were saying, so we have this creative capacity, and then we go through life and we experience what you could call conditioning. So we acquire patterns of thought and habits of behavior and ways of relating to ourselves and others. And so is everybody else. So when you talk about, I'm just trying to think of the best way to introduce this. So we go through our lives and we pick up these patterns and habits of thinking and behavior. And some of those patterns are, serve us quite well, and others don't. Some of those patterns may be detrimental to ourselves and may be detrimental to others. And so would you remind me of the question again about?
I think it was about how we start with initially the relationship with our parents, or maybe before that with ourselves. And as these relationships evolve, and we have to learn, like, this process of something goes wrong, you fall out with the person, you repair the relationship, and you come back into harmony. And nobody teaches us to do this, as far as I can figure out. You have to learn it by trial and error. Because no one ever sat down with me and said, Sorrel, when you fall out with somebody, this is how you repair the relationship.
Okay, so I'm really curious about what changed for you. What was it that allowed that to?
I thought it through. I thought, well, I must have been doing something wrong here. I can't believe it was all his fault. This is my ex. I must have been part of what was wrong in this relationship. I identified one thing. And the rest of the things that I had been doing, which had to do with having to be right all the time, which is quite interesting, really. Mark helped me identify that. But he could do that because he did it lovingly. He didn't say, oh, God, you have to be wrong all the time, don't you? It's like, oh, you have to be right all the time. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And that comes from boarding school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the thing I hear in what you're saying that's really what seems like one of the most important through threads is the role of insight and of wisdom. If we come back to the fact that we have this creative force that's creating our moment-to-moment experience, and then we have our conditioning, our ideas about ourselves and the world and how it works, which, by the way, is like a lens. It's not something that's visible to us until something happens that brings it to our awareness, like you've just mentioned. So our conditioning is more like a pair of goggles that colors everything we look at. And we can't tell we're wearing the goggles because they're made of reality, as far as we're concerned. Like, they're made of thought, and thought looks like reality. And so actually, the question becomes, how do we see through the conditioning we've acquired, or learn the skills we might need in order to relate in a healthy way? Well, the third aspect, when I was saying the most important, in a way, the most leveraged relationship we'll ever have is with ourselves. There's three elements to it. One is understanding that capacity for insight and for fresh new reality, like, it's crucial. Two is our relationship to our human, like our everyday human, that conditioned aspect of ourselves with all of those, flaws and weaknesses and fears and ways in which we need to secure ourselves. Like you mentioned that for you it was needing to be right. Well, we've all got all those flavors that exist but that's not who we really are. That's in the domain of our conditioned self, which is really just, which is, it's kind of that lens, that bunch of acquired stuff that we see the world through. Well, our relationship to that self matters too, to me. Like, I'll come back to that actually. It's important, but so the third aspect that I wanted to mention, the important relationship, is our relationship towards our own experience. See, because our conditioning is so invisible to us, including the effects of any bad experiences, traumatic experiences, whatever, because our conditioning is kind of invisible to us, the way we can tend to see what's going on is through how it's showing up in our reality, in our experience. So often that's the bit we want to fix. Like, how can I stop meeting men who treat me this way? Or how can I stop ending up in this kind of problem in relationships or whatever? But I think what's super valuable is when we actually can flip that and we realize that everything that we're experiencing out in the world, it's actually the most loving mirror to shine a light on where we've got that conditioning that's not who we really are. It's not truth, but it's a filter that's giving us the same results over and over again. And as we start to discover, and I realize it might sound kind of quite far out or quite hard to grasp, but as we start to discover that actually who we really are is whole, is capable of insight, of a completely new experience of ourselves, and the only thing that's getting in the way is habitual or old ideas about who we are or what we deserve or what we're worth or what we're capable of. The more we get to see that what's showing up around us is actually for us, is to let us experience, to shine a light on that invisible conditioning, to show us where we're not yet experiencing ourselves as the whole being, capable of those loving relationships as we are.
I think the thing that occurs to me with this is that it's like you say, that reality becomes a lens. It's a coloured lens, and we don't recognise it because it is our reality until you come to a moment, or it has happened for me, where there's a little flashpoint maybe, and it's a flashpoint that's drawn my attention to what was happening in terms of my conditioning and why I was doing the fact that I was doing it at all, first of all, and then to trace it back to why I was doing that, and then to be saying, well, that's fine then, because it started for a good reason.
Of course.
And it was my own inner resilience that started it. It was that creative force that you talk about.
Yeah.
I don't need it anymore, and it's not serving me. And then it just becomes a question of becoming aware of when I've got the sort of, I have to be right goggles on.
That's really beautiful, Sorrel. It's really beautiful. And I loved what you pointed to, that it's your own resilience, because part of that is that those patterns that we acquired, they were the best choice we had at the time. Like, every single person, even the ones who we think are doing horrible things, every single person is doing what makes sense given the way the world looks to them at that particular moment. And so, I talk about conditioning, but really I'm talking about almost like rules or decisions made at moments in time when that made perfect sense given the way the world looked. And so what I heard in what you described is there was flashpoints where, for whatever reason, um, one of those, one of those lenses, some aspect of that conditioning comes to light. And because you are, because of that creative potential, you're able to look at that as an adult now. It's been brought into the light of consciousness, into the light of day, and you can look and decide, does that serve you anymore? Does that serve you? And it was needed at some time. And that kind of brings me around to what I said about why it looks to me like these three aspects of our being matter, because our kind of ego, identity, our conditioning, our human, basically, it looks to me like insight and transformation stuff happen most readily when facilitated by love, like in a loving space, whether that's a loving relationship with a coach or therapist who's able to hold their client in unconditional love, whether it's in a context of another loving relationship, or whether it's in the context of your own being able to hold your own experience with kindness and compassion, instead of beating yourself up for the way you're struggling or the way you've behaved.
Yeah, and when we beat ourselves up, we just kind of hold it all down, and we don't allow that wisdom to come up.
Yeah, that it really looks to me like almost like this wisdom is almost like having like a river, like the source of life, of intelligence right by you, and then every time you hold yourself in judgment or beat yourself up, it's like you're somehow managing to hold yourself separate from the intelligence of life in a way. And like you say, it holds it in place. It's almost like glue. If like love and compassion and understanding is the facilitator, if it's WD-40, I think judgment is more like glue.
You can only hope that in the end it fails.
Yeah,
like glue always does in the end.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of clear about how all of this works in the context of a loving relationship. What's your take on the dysfunctional relationships that some of us find ourselves in some of the time?
Okay, that's a great question. I want to say one little bit about loving ones before I go on to the dysfunctional relationship. So, Sid Banks, who's the, most people here know who it is, but the guy who articulated the principles behind human experience that that underpin some of mine and Sorrel's work and a bunch of other people here. He said, it's all love and understanding. And that looks to me like so deeply true, like so deeply, deeply true, that it's all, that the like the key to realizing our own well-being, our own intrinsic peace of mind and psychological freedom and self-worth and all that kind of thing is one, understanding the nature of our experience, understanding our true nature, and understanding that that our ideas about ourselves are the least of who we truly are. And then love, which we've already talked about, but I think when it comes to for example, healing in relationship, I think our our systems are designed towards healing, towards wholeness. As long as there isn't something that gets in the way. And so when it comes to kind of healing from trauma, for example, I think often what happens is we have a bad experience. It's not safe to feel or process what comes up at the time, and so we contract, we park it, and it kind of stays there, running the show to some degree from behind the scenes, until we're in an environment, in a place where our system, in its wisdom, determines, oh, it's safe now for this to do this piece of processing, to experience this feeling. And so my own experience has been personally a lot, but also with clients and so on, is that arises naturally in an environment, that process, which is we don't have to make it happen. That's the intelligence of our system, that arises naturally in a space of love and safety. So that's kind of what I've got to say for now about loving relationships. You talked about dysfunctional relationships, which I think is a really great question. So in sort of standard therapeutic models, psychological models, and so on, there's lots of talk about things like attachment styles, or the victim triangle or drama triangle, or so on. Now, I think those things can be really valuable in a way I'll go on to explain now. I just wanted to give them a little bit of a health warning, because I think if we pursue these things without the foundation of knowing that we're innately whole, and it's really what we're up to is uncovering that, we're just getting back to the knowing of who we really are. I think without that, some of these things can just can be a bit of a rabbit hole, or send us on endless self-improvement loops. Where I do think they're valuable is that they can show us the conditioning that's at play. So if, for example, you look at something like the victim triangle is just a way of articulating that each of us, in the process of picking up those life scripts, from family and so on, we're going to likely experience all 3 points on this triangle over and over, but we're likely to have tendencies towards one or the other. And so the three places identified were victim, persecutor, and rescuer. Now, to me, these are valuable as they're just all indicators of when you're kind of not yourself, like when you're not in the knowing of your true nature. Noticing these patterns at play is one of the ways to shine a light on that conditioning, to make visible those lenses that you're seeing life through. Well, to just give myself as an example, my tendency was always towards rescuer. I felt a great deal of responsibility to make sure other people were okay ahead of myself. A tendency just I was more comfortable if I was negating my needs and making sure other people were okay. Well, there's a way in which not only is our perceptual reality a mirror to show us where our conditioning is, but what we experience in life is also showing us that. So what I've seen very often is, for example, if we have a tendency to rescue, we're more likely to be an energetic match for somebody who needs rescuing in life. if we have a tendency towards feeling at the effect of circumstance and other people, what gets labeled a victim in that, we're more likely to be a match for somebody whose tendency is towards blame or persecution. And this isn't, like, I mean this in the most impersonal sense, like these are scripts, these are ways of being that we all move through and that we all tend towards. And in life, certain things attract others, they fit together, they form their complement. And the reason I mentioned that when it comes to dysfunctional relationships is it's so tempting to look at how we can make the other person change, and how we can get them to behave differently. The only like the most super leveraged, but pretty much the only consistent sort of things changing in a generative, beneficial direction in your life is to look to your own patterns, to free yourself from them. Because each of us, and I don't mean this in a, like, I mean this with so much compassion for every single human being, because we're all subject to this same process. Each of us currently will discover, our lives have arranged themselves around us according to how we've been in the world with our conditioning, what we think we need, what we think we mustn't do, what we think is okay, and all that sort of thing. And the world will arrange itself around that accordingly. So to see change in the outside world, it's as we free ourselves from our own patterns, then we're no longer available to be that match for the other person's behavior. And what might that mean? It might mean that they have the opportunity to see something new and beautiful and experience a change. It may be that that relationship just is no longer a match. And just to say one more thing, actually, that I just wanted to hark back to the paradoxical nature of this, like the fact that the most significant, the relationship that kind of determines all others is ultimately the relationship with yourself for the reasons I've outlined. And we're relational beings, you know, we're designed to exist with each other. We're designed to coexist. So this isn't, you know, one of the temptations can be to remove ourselves from relationships if we struggle with them. But that is another, you know, response that came from wisdom at the time to difficulty or to experiences that happened in our life. But I just wanted to kind of tie it back together to say that because of this mirroring effect, I think that relationships offer the most incredible opportunity for growth, for both parties to see through the conditioning that's been getting in the way, to experience themselves more and more as the wholeness that they are. And I think that's always on the cards as a possibility. And
yeah.
And the other thing I just wanted to mention about the nature of paradox is, while our relationship with ourselves is the one that determines all others, sometimes we can't kickstart that by ourselves. Like sometimes we need the experience of being unconditionally loved before we're able to do it for ourselves. We need to see reflected in the eyes and the behavior of somebody else that the truth, which is that, you know, we matter, we belong, like we're intrinsically valuable. There's nothing any one of us needs to do to be more worthwhile, to be more acceptable, to belong to the world more. And there's nothing any one of us could do to make ourselves less than. But I think often we need to see that, to experience that through another as part of the journey to being able to kind of be that for ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree with that, Emma, that when you're stuck in that, don't want to call it self-loathing, for some people, that's what it is. It's really hard to get out of that unless you have that relationship to support you, where that person looks at you and thinks that, why would they not love you?
I think that's really true. And
Yeah.
I think it's that paradox again, that both things are always at play. So if you're in that self-loathing, I promise you that wisdom is still trying to pull you towards a mirror that will reflect back to you the wholeness and the beauty you are. And so the question is always, can you listen to that over the conditioning that tells you
Yeah.
you are not worth it, or you can't cope, or you couldn't handle it, or you don't matter, or whatever.
And to recognize that that voice is the voice of your conditioning.
Yeah,
It's
very much.
not true.
Very much.
Just before we move on to the Q&A, I guess for me, the thing that makes me most sad is that you can have a couple where, now I'm thinking of my former marriage, where I feel like I'm the lucky one, because I got out and I started the healing process, and I came across the principles, and then I met Mark, and he's had some therapy, but I know from what my children tell me that there's still, from what I can tell, there's still quite a long way to go,
Yeah,
and I think he's decided that's it. No more relationships. They're
yeah,
too difficult. And I wasn't the last one. There's somebody else in between, but and it's like, and I can't say anything to him because I don't talk to him, because he won't talk to me. So, and I'm not asking my children to talk to him, because that would be entirely inappropriate.
yeah,
But more in a kind of abstract sense of what you say to someone who says, well, I just, I've given up. I can't do relationships.
yeah.
Where's the little chink in the armor, if you like, that allows us in?
Well, I think, and people here who are on a program of mine probably get fed up of hearing me say this, but I think the most valuable question always to ask first is, what's here for me? What's here for me? And so, for example, I ran years and years of a pattern of, I won't be okay until another person has found peace, moved on, that kind of thing. And again, that's really pointing me to my struggle to be with my own experience around that, and my need for other people to be okay before I can finally be okay. I think what you raise is a really good point. I fully understand it and feel it, and I felt it too. And I think ultimately every single one of us is on our own journey, really, journey back to, back home, back to the knowing of ourselves as uh, who we truly are. I think every one of us, regardless of our experience, has a capacity for healthy relationships, and we don't get to decide whether people take that option in this lifetime. I know that sounds a bit bleak, but it's not up to us.
Oh, absolutely.
Um, and I think all we can do is as fully as we're able to, embody and live and express the truth of what's true and beautiful that we see. And who knows,
Mm.
something might occur to you at some point. Something might change in that relationship. but ultimately we're each on our own track, I think.
And he's definitely not my responsibility. And I think that's a big thing, is it, to recognise that the only person we have responsibility for really is ourselves.
Ultimately, yeah.
And everyone else is responsible for their emotional welfare or their well-being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in a way, I'd go further and say our highest responsibility to everyone else is to take care of ourselves too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Is that a good time to bring this to a close and open up the
Sure.
answer? I'm going to stop the recording.